The sound of rain hitting the tin roof was the only music that filled the nights of Ethan and Liam, identical twin brothers. Born into a humble home, the peeling walls seemed to bear witness to every tear, every fleeting smile. Their father, a man with calloused hands, left too soon, leaving their mother with the daunting task of raising the two boys alone. Poverty wasn't just a condition. It was the constant shadow shaping their dreams and fears. While Ethan clung to the idea that education was the bridge to another world, Liam saw hard work as an endless prison. Ethan had an old notebook, passed down from a distant cousin, where he scribbled his plans for the future. He dreamed of becoming someone important, maybe a business owner, perhaps even a millionaire. He saw possibilities where others saw limits. Liam, on the other hand, with his torn shirt and hardened expression, laughed at his brother's fantasies. To him, life was a survival game, and the smartest players were the ones who took what they wanted. "You're going to die trying, Ethan. I'd rather live by winning," Liam would say, his gaze carrying the resignation of someone who had long stopped believing in happy endings. When their mother fell ill, Ethan cared for her, holding her hand and reading stories softly. Liam, meanwhile, would disappear for hours, returning only when the night had swallowed the horizon. He brought food, sure, but also the wary looks of someone who knew there was a cost. The fights between the brothers started early, like storms that promised never to pass. With every argument, the rift between them widened, until silence became the only language they seemed to understand. Even so, there were moments of truce. One summer afternoon, the two decided to climb the hill behind their house, where the wind seemed freer. From the top they could see the city in the distance, a sea of lights and possibilities. Ethan pointed to the buildings, saying that one day he'd live there. Liam just shook his head, but the faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth betrayed a hint of pride. They were brothers after all, and despite the conflicts, an invisible bond still held them together. Their mother's death, years later, was the final blow for the twins. Ethan left for the city with a scholarship and a borrowed suitcase. Liam stayed behind, burying what little hope he had left. Life pulled them apart, but not without leaving scars. Ethan built the life he'd dreamed of. Liam, meanwhile, followed a path where shortcuts always led to dead ends. But as fate would have it, stories like theirs are never left unfinished for long. Ethan was the living example of what people once called a self-made man. He stood before a packed hall, surrounded by business leaders, celebrities, and community figures, all hanging on his every word. On stage, holding the microphone with the confidence of someone who had faced storms and emerged victorious, he announced a multi-million-dollar donation to a social project aimed at supporting underprivileged youth. The room erupted into a standing ovation. Ethan smiled, but his mind wandered. Perhaps it was the memory of the hard days, or maybe it was the weight of something he couldn't quite name. While Ethan was being celebrated for his success across the city, Liam was running for his life. The sound of footsteps echoed in the dark streets as he tried to outrun two men with dangerous intentions. Liam had lost everything in a scheme that promised quick riches, but only sank him deeper into debt. The warehouse where he'd made his last deal was now a ghost in his memory, a stark emblem of his downfall. At every turn, the world seemed to close in on him. Liam ducked into a filthy alley, trying to catch his breath as the men ran past, shouting threats. His body trembled, but it wasn't fear, it was anger boiling inside him. Anger at the system, at the world, and most of all, at himself. He knew his choices had led him here, but he refused to accept defeat. In the chaos of his thoughts, an idea began to form. He had a brother, a millionaire. For the first time in years, Ethan's name escaped his lips in a bitter whisper. Sitting on the curb, Liam stared at his hands as if searching for answers. He knew reaching out to Ethan meant swallowing every last shred of pride he had left. But what choice did he have? The men hunting him weren't about to give up, and Liam wasn't eager to find out how far they'd go. With bitter determination, he rose to his feet and began walking. Each step felt like a war cry from his pride. Later that night, Ethan stood on the balcony of his penthouse, gazing at the city skyline. He held a glass of wine, lost in thoughts of all he'd achieved and, perhaps, all he'd left behind. He had no idea that, at that moment, Liam was walking the long road to his mansion. As Ethan basked in the comfort of his carefully built life, his past was quite literally on its way to his doorstep. When Liam finally arrived at the gates of Ethan's sprawling mansion, exhaustion was etched on his face. But he clung tightly to what little courage he had left. The security guard eyed him with suspicion, as if he could sense the chaos trailing behind this uninvited guest. Liam, however, didn't waver. He asked to see his brother, the millionaire. And in that moment, fate silently turned its gears, setting the stage for a reunion that would change everything. The clock on the mansion's wall struck midnight when the intercom's buzz broke the silence. On the other end, the security guard's voice sounded puzzled. "Mr. Ethan, there's someone here claiming to be your brother." Ethan, sitting in his office reviewing contracts, froze for a moment. Liam? He hadn't heard that name in years. Setting the papers aside, he walked to the front hall, his mind already racing with questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. When the door opened, Ethan barely recognized the man standing before him. Liam was gaunt, his face drawn and his clothes worn, stained with blood and grime. "I need help," were the first words out of his mouth. But there was something in Liam's eyes, a mix of desperation and anger, that made Ethan hesitate. He could sense trouble before hearing the full story. "Are you okay? What happened?" he asked, though his voice carried more suspicion than concern. Liam didn't waste time. He stepped into the house uninvited, leaving a trail of dirt on the pristine marble floors. "My life's a mess, Ethan. They're going to kill me," he said as he collapsed onto the nearest couch. Ethan, still stunned, closed the door and followed, arms crossed. "Who? Why? And what are you doing here?" The questions spilled out in rapid succession, but Liam didn't seem interested in answering them. He just repeated, "I needed you." The next few minutes were filled with disjointed explanations. Liam spoke of debts, threats, and deals gone wrong. He described the men chasing him and how he'd decided Ethan was his only option. Ethan listened in silence, his expression hardening with every word. It wasn't compassion that filled his face. It was the growing realization that Liam's presence might only bring more problems. "So, you thought you could just show up here after all these years, and I'd fix everything for you?" Ethan asked, his voice as cold as steel. Liam had expected this reaction. "I know I messed up," he said, standing to face his brother. "But you have resources, Ethan. You can help me. I had nowhere else to go." The tension in the room was almost suffocating. Ethan took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. He wanted to throw Liam out, to tell him the past didn't matter anymore. But something held him back. Maybe it was the ghost of their mother, or the unbreakable thread of shared blood. Ethan began asking more pointed questions, trying to gauge the full extent of Liam's troubles. But every answer only deepened his distrust. Liam was clearly hiding something, and Ethan knew that was never a good sign. "You're not telling me everything, are you?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. Liam averted his gaze, confirming Ethan's suspicions. "You have to trust me," Liam said, but the words rang hollow, almost ironic. Then, out of nowhere, Liam dropped a bombshell. "I know your secret." Ethan froze, his eyes locked on his brother. "What are you talking about?" Liam's expression shifted, from pleading to something more calculated, almost threatening. "I know what you did in the past, Ethan. I know you're not as perfect as everyone thinks." The air in the room seemed to thicken. For the first time, Ethan, who had been in control, felt caught off guard. Seeing the impact of his words, Liam pressed on. "You think your life is untouchable, that you are above everything and everyone. But I know the truth, and if people found out, you'd lose it all." Ethan felt his anger rising, but managed to hold it back. "Did you come here to ask for help or to blackmail me?" he asked, his voice laced with frustration. Liam shrugged. "Maybe both." The smile he gave wasn't triumphant, but the kind of smile worn by someone who had nothing left to lose. Ethan began pacing the room, trying to collect his thoughts. He couldn't dismiss Liam's threat, but trusting him was out of the question. The fact remained, though, that Liam was now inside his house, and sending him away could make things worse. "You can stay," Ethan said finally, his tone reluctant. "But that doesn't mean I trust you. And we're going to deal with this, whatever it is, once and for all." Liam let out a breath of relief. He knew he'd won the first battle, but the war was far from over. As Ethan climbed the stairs to the second floor, Liam lingered in the opulent living room, taking in the luxury surrounding him. He ran a finger along the edge of a priceless vase, a small smile playing on his lips. For a fleeting moment, he imagined what it would be like to live in this world, to own it all. But he knew the real game was only beginning. Upstairs, Ethan stood by the window, staring out at the still night. He questioned whether he'd made the right decision letting Liam stay. The city outside was calm, but inside the house, a storm was brewing. And as the clock continued its silent march forward, the two brothers, so different yet bound by blood, were about to find themselves entangled in a chain of events that would change their lives forever. The next morning, the contrast was striking. While Ethan reviewed important contracts in his office, Liam wandered the mansion like a child in a toy store. He ran his fingers along the furniture, studied the artwork, and even tested out a leather armchair by the fireplace. Ethan noticed his brother's carefree attitude, and it grated on him. "Remember, you're here temporarily. Don't forget that," he warned, his voice firm. Liam just smiled, that slightly cynical smile he knew how to wield so well. Ethan laid out clear rules. Liam was to stay out of his business, avoid contact with the staff, and, above all, not cause trouble. Liam, however, treated the instructions like suggestions, nodding absent-mindedly. Ethan tried to focus on his work, but it was impossible to ignore the fact that his chaotic brother was now part of his meticulously controlled world. Clara, Ethan's personal assistant, was the first to sense something unusual. She ran into Liam in the kitchen and was caught off guard when he made an offhand joke that made her laugh. "You must be the famous Clara," he said, as if they were already acquainted. Clara felt a bit uneasy, but Liam's charm was disarming. Unlike Ethan, he was spontaneous, approachable, and human in a way she found intriguing. Little by little, Liam began to insert himself. He observed how Ethan interacted with Clara and the other staff, subtly mimicking his tone and demeanor. That evening, while Ethan was on an important call, Liam slipped into the empty office and flipped through papers that seemed innocuous but held valuable details. He didn't take anything, but the glint in his eyes betrayed a brewing plan. Ethan, realizing Liam's presence was disrupting his routine, tried to set boundaries. "You can use the guest room, but don't wander the house unnecessarily," he said in a sterner tone. Liam, feigning innocence, replied, "Of course, brother. I'm here to stay out of the way." Yet, as soon as Ethan turned his back, Liam's sly grin returned. He knew exactly how to play this game. The mansion staff began to take note of Liam as well. He had a knack for making people feel comfortable, as if they'd known him for years. The gardener, who rarely exchanged more than a greeting with Ethan, spent half an hour chatting with Liam about flowers. The head housekeeper mentioned that his energy was infectious. Ethan, however, wasn't fooled. He knew Liam was more wolf than lamb. One sunny morning, Ethan left for a meeting, leaving Liam alone in the house for the first time. It was the perfect opportunity. Liam explored every corner of the mansion, soaking in the details of Ethan's luxurious life. He even took a photo in front of a piece of artwork and sent it to an unknown number with the message, "Almost there." When Ethan returned, he found Liam lounging on the veranda, as if he hadn't left his room all day. Clara started noticing subtle changes in Ethan's behavior. He was more irritable, more distracted. She tried asking if something was bothering him, but Ethan brushed it off. "It's just business," he said, though Clara suspected there was more to it. Liam, meanwhile, continued his invisible work, winning silent allies as he ingratiated himself further into Ethan's world. The turning point came during a dinner. Clara had been invited to discuss a charitable campaign with Ethan, but Liam unexpectedly joined them. He engaged Clara in conversation as though they were old friends, and despite herself, Clara found his presence enjoyable. Ethan watched the interaction from a distance, an uncomfortable sensation building in his chest. He couldn't deny Liam's ability to charm people, but it only deepened his mistrust. Feeling more confident, Liam began openly questioning Ethan about his business. "It must be incredible to have all this. How do you manage it all?" he asked, feigning genuine curiosity. Ethan responded cautiously, revealing as little as possible. But Liam was a skilled listener, and every detail he caught was stored like a puzzle piece in the grand picture he was building. He was crafting the perfect setup for what was to come. That night, Liam returned to the guest room and opened a notebook where he recorded his observations and plans. Each page contained detailed notes about Ethan, his routine, his weaknesses. Liam knew the key to success was patience. The right moment would come. Meanwhile, Ethan sat upstairs reviewing financial reports, unaware that the real threat wasn't outside his doors, but within his own home. Staring at the ceiling before falling asleep, Ethan couldn't shake a nagging unease. Something was wrong, though he couldn't put his finger on it. Liam, on the other hand, slept soundly, pleased with the day's progress. He knew the game had only just begun, and every move was a critical step in his strategy. As the mansion settled into silence, the tension between the brothers continued to simmer, waiting for the inevitable eruption. Ethan began noticing the first signs that something was amiss. It was a quiet afternoon when he received an unusual call from his bank. "Mr. Ethan, we've detected an unusual request on one of your accounts," the manager informed him. Ethan, startled, assured them he hadn't authorized anything. He hung up with a knot in his stomach, suspecting that Liam's presence was beginning to have consequences that went beyond emotional strain. The mansion staff started noticing odd occurrences as well. Clara, always observant, remarked that important documents that usually remained on Ethan's desk were sometimes slightly out of place. She hesitated to sound paranoid, but mentioned it to Ethan in passing. "Maybe it's just the wind," she joked, but Ethan's expression turned cold. The wind never tampered with his company's contracts. Liam, meanwhile, seemed increasingly comfortable in his role as the guest. He roamed the house as though he owned it, chatting with staff and familiarizing himself with every detail of the household's routine. More than once, Ethan came home to find Liam sitting in his office chair. "I hope you don't mind. It's just so comfortable," Liam would say with an innocent smile. Ethan would roll his eyes, silently adding to the growing mental list of everything that fell off. During a meeting with a key investor, Ethan was taken aback when the man said, "Your idea about diversifying into real estate is intriguing." The problem was, Ethan had never proposed such an idea. Realizing someone was speaking on his behalf, Ethan immediately suspected Liam, the only person who had enough access to make such a move. This incident set off alarms Ethan could no longer ignore. Over dinner one evening, Clara commented that Liam was surprisingly charismatic. "He's got something in common with you, but he's more approachable," she said with a laugh. Ethan forced a smile, but his discomfort was obvious. He knew Liam's charm well, but also knew it was always a vehicle for hidden motives. The growing sense that Liam was manipulating everyone around him became harder to shake. Later, while checking his phone, Ethan noticed a recent call to an unfamiliar number. The record was brief, but enough to arouse suspicion. He confronted Liam about it, but as expected, Liam denied everything. "You think I'm using your phone? Seriously, Ethan?" "You're getting paranoid," Liam said, feigning indignation. Ethan didn't reply, but the seed of mistrust planted earlier now had deeper roots. Another unsettling moment came when Ethan spotted one of his expensive watches on Liam's wrist. "I thought you never even wore this," Liam said with a wide grin when confronted. Ethan snatched the watch back without a word, his patience nearing its end. He knew he had to act, but without concrete evidence, taking drastic measures felt premature. Liam also began planting subtle doubts in Ethan's mind, chipping away at his sense of stability. "You've been working too hard, brother. Maybe you should take a vacation," Liam suggested with a tone that was equal parts advice and provocation. Ethan hated to admit it, but Liam was adept at getting under his skin, planting seeds of insecurity that grew far too quickly. The breaking point came when a close friend remarked, "You seemed different the other day. More laid back." Ethan was baffled. He hadn't met with that friend recently. It became clear that Liam was overstepping boundaries, impersonating him in subtle but consequential ways. Ethan knew the time for observing and waiting was over. He had to confront the situation head-on before Liam caused irreparable damage. Finally, on a quiet night, Ethan confronted Liam. "Do you even realize what you're doing? Because I know you've been meddling in my life in ways you shouldn't," he said, staring his brother down. Liam, as always, denied everything, but this time his response came with a smirk. "Maybe being you isn't as hard as it looks," he said before walking out of the room. Ethan stood there, trying to process what he'd just heard. It was clear that Liam wasn't just an emotional or familial threat. He was becoming a real danger to Ethan's life and business. Liam's words echoed in Ethan's mind, and for the first time, he felt as though he was losing control of the situation. The brother he had taken in was slowly taking over his life. Alone in his bedroom, Ethan stared at himself in the mirror. He questioned how things had come to this, and what he needed to do next. Liam was like a silent storm, dismantling everything in subtle yet devastating ways. But Ethan knew he couldn't continue reacting passively. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. Liam knew he was close to achieving his goal. Every move was calculated, every word spoken designed to weave him deeper into Ethan's life. He didn't rush, knowing that success depended on waiting for the perfect moment. Over dinner one evening, Liam noticed Ethan seemed more distracted than ever, lost in thought. That was when Liam decided it was time to act. And for that, he needed an airtight plan. The first step involved winning Clara's trust. Liam caught her in the kitchen after her shift, his charismatic demeanor on full display. "You know, Clara, you're the heart of this house. I don't know how Ethan could do any of this without you," he said with a smile. Clara laughed, flattered but a bit wary. Yet Liam knew exactly how to disarm resistance by making people feel special. Meanwhile, Ethan was so consumed by his work that he barely noticed what was happening at home. He trusted his strict routines and controls to keep everything in check, but Liam knew how to exploit the cracks. In Ethan's office, Liam began accessing key information, from bank account details to confidential contracts. He never tampered directly, simply observed, storing every piece of data for future use. The next phase of Liam's plan revolved around a special evening. Ethan had organized an important dinner with top investors, and Liam surprised everyone by volunteering to help. During the dinner, Liam stayed in the background, attentively listening and studying Ethan's interactions with the guests. He absorbed every nuance, learning how Ethan handled high-pressure situations. With each moment, Liam grew more confident in his ability to step into Ethan's role. That night, Ethan began feeling an unusual drowsiness shortly after dinner. Assuming it was accumulated exhaustion, he went to bed, unaware that Liam had discreetly spiked his drink with a mild sedative. As the feeling overtook him, Ethan retired to his room without suspecting a thing. Liam seized the opportunity, moving swiftly to execute the next stage of his plan with meticulous precision. Ethan woke up hours later, but not in his bed. He was in a dark, damp space, his hands bound and his mouth parched. "Liam," he shouted, his voice echoing without reply. His memories were hazy, and he struggled to piece together what had happened. Meanwhile, Liam, now dressed in one of Ethan's tailored suits, sat in Ethan's office preparing for the boldest part of his scheme, fully assuming Ethan's identity. Liam began making calls to Ethan's key contacts, mimicking his tone and mannerisms with startling accuracy. Subtle changes followed, including transferring small sums of money to offshore accounts. His strategy was simple: keep the adjustments small enough to avoid drawing attention while quietly building a path to escape with a fortune. Clara was the first to notice something amiss. "You seem different today," she remarked while handing documents to Liam, thinking he was Ethan. Liam laughed it off. "Maybe I finally got some decent sleep," he replied smoothly. Clara let it go, though the sense that something wasn't right lingered. She decided not to confront him yet, but resolved to keep a closer eye on him. Meanwhile, Ethan struggled to free himself from his makeshift prison. He soon realized he was in a warehouse, tied to a chair. His mind raced with feelings of betrayal and frustration. How had Liam managed this? And more importantly, how would he escape? He knew time was of the essence. The longer he remained out of the picture, the deeper Liam's roots would grow. Now fully in control, Liam prepared for the final stage of his plan, transferring large sums of money into offshore accounts. The weeks of observation and data collection paid off as he executed complex financial transactions, all while maintaining Ethan's polished image for the staff and business partners. Remarkably, no one seemed to suspect anything. Liam had perfected his imitation of the millionaire. But Liam made one small mistake. During a call with an investor, he used a phrase Ethan would never say. The investor found it odd but didn't mention it until later, when he brought it up with Clara. Suspicious, Clara began piecing together inconsistencies. Something isn't right, she thought, and resolved to investigate further. Back in the warehouse, Ethan found a shard of metal on the floor and began working at the ropes binding him. His emotions oscillated between anger and determination. Liam had crossed every imaginable line, and Ethan knew it was up to him to reclaim his life, not just for himself, but for everything he had built. As Liam edged closer to completing his plan and Ethan fought to regain control, the brothers' conflict hurtled toward an explosive confrontation. Both knew the stakes. One was prepared to take everything, while the other was fighting to preserve it all. Ethan knew he had to stay calm to survive. The warehouse where he was being held was damp and smelled of rust, with a single flickering light casting eerie shadows above him. Using the shard of metal he'd found on the floor, he worked methodically at the ropes cutting into his wrists, ignoring the pain. As he labored, his mind replayed the events of the past days, trying to piece together how Liam had managed to deceive him so thoroughly. But answers didn't matter now. What mattered was escape. As Ethan fought physically to free himself, his mind battled with anger and betrayal. It was unfathomable that his own brother had orchestrated something so cruel. Yet, amid the fury, a stronger force emerged: determination. Ethan had built his life by overcoming adversity, and he wouldn't let Liam destroy it all. Finally, with a sharp snap, the ropes gave way. He rubbed his raw wrists, got to his feet, and began searching for a way out. In the mansion's office, Liam continued cementing his position. His confidence had grown so much that he'd scheduled a meeting with shareholders to discuss new strategic directions. Clara, who attended the meeting, watched him closely. He resembled Ethan in nearly every way, but small details, how he held a pen or the slight difference in his tone, gave him away. Clara's suspicions deepened, and she knew she needed to act. Back at the warehouse, Ethan discovered a side door secured with a heavy padlock. Using the shard of metal, his only tool, he worked feverishly to break it open. He heard footsteps outside, heightening the tension. He knew being caught would give Liam enough time to finish his scheme. With a final, desperate effort. The lock gave way, and Ethan slipped out into the cold night. He took a deep breath and moved quickly, his senses on high alert. Clara began discreetly investigating. She reviewed recent documents signed by Ethan and found something alarming: financial transfers to unfamiliar accounts. The signature was flawless, but Clara knew it wasn't authentic. She needed more concrete evidence before confronting Liam or alerting others. Deciding on a careful approach, she kept her suspicions to herself for the time being. Ethan, now free, stumbled upon a payphone in a deserted neighborhood. He tried calling Clara, but there was no answer. Frustrated, he resolved to head home, knowing full well Liam might be waiting. As he made his way through the dark streets, he began crafting a plan. He couldn't simply accuse Liam. He needed irrefutable proof of his brother's actions. At the mansion, Liam was growing increasingly comfortable in his role. He moved through the corridors like the rightful owner, and even the staff, though slightly puzzled, seemed to accept this new version of Ethan. Clara, however, wasn't fooled. Using an excuse to access the office, she combed through digital records and discovered a series of suspicious transfers that confirmed her worst fears. When Ethan finally arrived at the mansion, he avoided the front door, knowing Liam had the upper hand. Instead, he used a side entrance meant for staff and found Clara in the office. Startled, she nearly screamed, but Ethan quickly reassured her. "It's me. We need to talk," he said, urgency in his voice like she'd never heard before. Clara listened intently as Ethan recounted everything: his kidnapping, Liam's manipulation, and the plan to steal his fortune. Already suspicious, Clara now knew for certain she had to help Ethan reclaim control. Together, they began devising a strategy to expose Liam without alarming the staff or giving him a chance to flee. Unaware of the alliance forming against him, Liam remained focused on the final phase of his plan: transferring large sums to an international account and disappearing. He had already booked a flight out of the country and planned to leave the next evening. "By tomorrow night, all of this will be behind me," he murmured, confident in his imminent success. Ethan and Clara knew they had to move quickly. Using the information Clara had uncovered, Ethan accessed a server containing critical financial records. Together, they traced the transfers Liam had made and gathered enough evidence to dismantle his scheme. But Ethan knew documentation alone wasn't enough. He needed to confront Liam directly and force a confession. With their plan in place, Ethan and Clara waited for the right moment. Liam was in the office, finalizing his transactions, when Ethan entered. The sight of him froze Liam in his tracks. "You didn't think I'd stay gone forever, did you?" Ethan said, his voice a mix of anger and unshakable resolve. Liam tried to maintain his composure, but the panic in his eyes was unmistakable. The final showdown was about to begin. Ethan stood face to face with Liam, but this time there was no room for ambiguity. The millionaire carried in his gaze the accumulated fury of the past days, tempered by the calculated calm of someone who knew the game was about to turn. "You've gone too far, Liam. I thought we were brothers, but now I see you're only here to destroy everything I've built," Ethan said firmly. Liam laughed, but it was a strained laugh. He knew he'd lost the element of surprise, but he wasn't ready to back down. "You think this is just about money?" Liam shot back, standing from his chair with a defiant look. "No, Ethan. This is about you, about your hypocrisy. The perfect man, the shining example of success. But I know who you really are." Ethan remained still, though his clenched fists betrayed that Liam's words had struck a nerve. "What are you talking about?" Ethan asked, his voice lower now, but laden with tension. Liam seized the moment to step closer. "Do you think I've forgotten? The report, Ethan. You turned me over to the cops years ago, like some sacrificial lamb. You condemned me, and for what? To save me? To teach me a lesson? No, you did it because you needed a hero in your story, someone to point to and say, 'I'm better than him.'" Liam's words cut like blades, and Ethan felt the weight of a guilt he'd tried to bury. I did it to protect you, Ethan finally responded, breaking the silence. His voice was a mix of regret and self-justification. You were running with dangerous people, Liam. If I hadn't done that, you might be dead by now. But Liam wasn't interested in hearing it. And instead of helping me, you chose to destroy me. You let me rot in that place while you built your empire. Don't tell me you did it for me. Ethan tried to argue, but Liam wasn't done. He opened a drawer and threw a folder onto the desk, its contents spilling out. Here it is, Ethan. The proof of who you really are. The report you filed, your statements. All of it could ruin you in an instant. Ethan stared at the documents, feeling the ground shift beneath his feet. He knew that if those papers surfaced, not only his business, but his very identity would be at stake. Clara, who had been watching the confrontation from a strategic vantage point, decided it was time to intervene. Enough, she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a thunderclap. You're both destroying yourselves over something that happened years ago. This has to stop. The two brothers turned to her, startled. Clara continued, Ethan, you were wrong not to extend a hand to Liam when he needed you most. And Liam, you're drowning in revenge, as if it's going to fix anything. Neither of you is right. Clara's words brought a brief moment of reflection, but Liam wasn't ready to back down. You think a pretty speech erases what he did? He asked with sarcasm. Ethan, however, raised a hand to silence him. No, he said firmly. Nothing will erase what I did, but I can try to make it right, and that starts now. He stepped closer to Liam, meeting his brother's gaze. If you want to ruin my reputation, go ahead, but it won't change what happened, and it won't bring you peace. Liam hesitated. For the first time, his expression of anger gave way to something more vulnerable, doubt. He held the papers in his hands, staring at them as if they were a mirror reflecting his own pain. Ethan pressed on, Do you want justice, Liam? I'm standing right here. But you have to decide what you really want, revenge, or a chance to start over. The room fell silent, except for the distant ticking of a clock, as if even fate was waiting for Liam's decision. Finally, Liam let the papers slip from his hands to the floor. He looked at Ethan, his eyes filled with a mix of regret and exhaustion. I don't want to be you, Ethan, he said, almost in a whisper. I just wanted to be someone. Ethan stepped forward and placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. You can be, but not like this. It was a moment of quiet but powerful reconciliation, where years of bitterness began to dissolve. Clara, sensing the worst was over, started gathering the papers from the floor. So, what do we do now? She asked, looking between the two brothers. Ethan responded calmly. We start over. Together. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but in that moment, he was ready to do whatever it took to repair what had been broken. Liam, though still hesitant, seemed willing to give it a chance. As the night wore on, the brothers began to talk. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was a start. Ethan dropped his defensive posture and truly listened to Liam, perhaps for the first time in years. Liam, in turn, began to admit his own failings and the impact of his choices. It wasn't a magical solution, but it was a step in the right direction. In that very office, where so many lies and manipulations had taken place, something genuine began to emerge. Ethan knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he also knew that, for the first time, he and Liam were on the same side. And as the clock continued its steady ticking, the two brothers decided that together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. As Ethan and Liam were finally starting to reconcile, the calm in the mansion was shattered by the screech of tires at the front gate. Clara, in the office, answered an unexpected call from security. There are armed men demanding to be let in. They said they have unfinished business with Mr. Liam. Clara froze for a moment before responding, Don't let them in. But it was too late. The men had already forced their way through the gate and were heading toward the house. Ethan turned to Liam, his face a mix of shock and disbelief. What did you do now, Liam? He asked, trying to keep his composure. Liam lowered his head, guilt and shame written all over his face. "Creditors from my past," he admitted. "I owed the money. I thought I'd be able to pay them off before they found me." Ethan could barely process what he was hearing. Before he could respond, the front door was kicked open, and 3 armed men stormed in. The leader, a stocky man with a scar running across his face, addressed Liam but called him by Ethan's name. "Thought you could skip out on us, living like a king," he said with a sneer. Liam tried to explain, but the man wasn't interested. "Doesn't matter who you say you are now. If you've got money, we're taking what we're owed." Ethan quickly realized the men thought Liam was him, the wealthy one. He tried to correct them. "You've got the wrong person. I'm Ethan and he's..." But before he could finish, Liam cut him off. "Shut up," he shouted, suddenly resolute. Liam knew that revealing his real identity would only escalate the danger. He had to handle the mess he'd created, even if it meant keeping up the charade. As the tension mounted, Clara, hidden behind a bookshelf, discreetly sent an emergency message to the police. She knew the men were heavily armed, and that time was of the essence. Meanwhile, Liam tried to negotiate. "You'll get what you want, but let's keep things calm," he said, his voice a mix of fear and confidence. The men hesitated but kept their weapons raised. The breaking point came when the leader, impatient, pointed his gun at Ethan. "If we don't get the money now, we'll start shooting," he threatened. In a swift and unexpected move, Liam lunged at the man, knocking him to the ground. Chaos erupted in the room. Ethan seized the opportunity to disarm another intruder, while Clara, in a rare display of bravery, struck the third man with a heavy object. The struggle was brief but intense, ending just as the sound of sirens in the distance signaled the arrival of the police. When officers stormed the mansion, the armed men were quickly subdued and taken into custody. Ethan and Liam, exhausted and breathing heavily, collapsed onto the couch side by side, still processing the chaos. "You just had to bring more trouble, didn't you?" Ethan said, his voice a mix of frustration and humor. Liam, flashing a tired smile, replied, "I told you my life wasn't simple." Despite the tension, they both knew something had shifted. This time, they had faced a challenge together and made it through. The mansion was finally quiet again. The police had taken the intruders away, and Clara was in the office, tidying up the documents scattered during the confrontation. Yet, the emotional tension between the two brothers lingered. Sitting side by side on the couch, Ethan and Liam didn't speak, but it was as though both were replaying every detail of the past days in their minds. The weight of the past was still there, but something in their expressions hinted that the future might hold something different. Liam, breaking the silence, was the first to speak. "I'm not going to drag you into my problems anymore, Ethan," he said with a sincerity he rarely showed. "I messed up, but I want to fix it. I don't know how, but I want to try." Ethan looked at him, no longer with anger, just exhaustion and a glimmer of hope. "Fixing things isn't easy, Liam. But if you're willing to change, I'll help," he replied. It was a simple promise, but one heavy with meaning. The next morning, Liam made a decision that surprised Ethan. He would turn himself in to the police for the crimes he'd committed in the past. "I'm done running," he said. "If I'm going to start over, I want to do it right." Ethan, initially hesitant, agreed to support him with legal and financial help. Clara, ever pragmatic, was already contacting lawyers to ensure Liam had a real chance at rebuilding his life. As Liam was taken away by the police, Ethan stood at the mansion's entrance, watching the car disappear over the horizon. He felt a mix of relief and sadness, but also something he hadn't felt in years: pride in his brother. For the first time, Liam was taking responsibility for his actions. And to Ethan, that was a monumental step. Clara approached him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "He'll be okay," she said with conviction. "And so will you." Later, Ethan went to his office and opened a drawer, finding an old photograph of the two brothers as kids, playing in the yard of their humble childhood home. He held the photo for a few moments, letting the memories flood back. Then, he placed it in a frame and set it on his desk. To Ethan, it was a reminder that, despite the mistakes and hardships, family ties could be rebuilt. And as he gazed out the window, he knew this was just the first of many new chapters he and Liam would write together. The story of Ethan and Liam is a powerful reminder that no matter how far we stray, family bonds can be restored with effort and reconciliation. Each brother's journey was shaped by choices, mistakes, and resentment. But in the end, they both learned that true wealth lies in the connections we build and the determination to mend what's been broken. Now, what would you do if you were in Ethan's shoes? Do you think Liam truly deserves a second chance? And in the end, how would you define what it means to be truly rich? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. We have more heartfelt and inspiring stories waiting for you. Before you go, check out the next video on your screen now. I'm sure it will touch you deeply and help you see new possibilities. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next story. Until then, take care.